much, Paul. So next we have two speakers, Kelly Henderson and Dr. Brita Hansen, discussing scope of practice considerations for AI. Kelly and Dr. Hansen are both joining us today from Allina Health. Kelly is Vice President for Risk Services and Deputy Chief Legal Officer. She oversees risk management, insurance, workers' compensation, and all litigation matters. Dr. Hansen is a board-certified internist and clinical informaticist leading digital innovation at Allina, including the responsible use of AI in care delivery settings. Thank you both for speaking today on this exciting scope of practice topic.
All right, thank you for having me this morning. As you can see, we are going to jointly give this talk and present both the MD and the JD perspective from within a healthcare organization, a provider organization. So I'm going to start with the MD perspective. As Molly mentioned, part of my role at Allina is overseeing the team of folks who does the evaluation and oversight of AI systems that we use in care delivery. So my portion of the talk is really going to focus on how we think about that as we are evaluating and using these systems. So I'm going to start again where others have already touched on this, but the basic question of what is artificial intelligence, particularly as we are looking at using these within healthcare organizations. So this is the definition we use at Allina Health. You can see here that artificial intelligence or AI refers to computational systems or algorithms that can perform tasks, solve problems, or generate outputs in a way that mimics human intelligence. And this last clause is what our team, as we are doing this oversight work, has added to really reflect where AI is now as opposed to where AI has been in the past. And that is that current AI systems, particularly when we're thinking about generative AI and AI built off of large language models, are not limited by strict rules or explicit programming. So human beings are not defining every single if-then statement or programming in the chain. And so we think this is an important distinction of the types of AI models that are currently being used, and they require additional evaluation and oversight when we are using them. So if we take that last clause of that definition away, and I think others, I think Mark touched on this, that we have actually, in the broader definition of AI, been using AI within healthcare systems for decades. So at least as long as we have been using electronic health records within health systems, we have been using some form or another of AI. And so I often think about this as across the spectrum, and we've touched on this already a bit this morning. But I also have on the top of this slide that it's about choosing the right tool for the right job. So just because we have more advanced AI and generative AI now does not mean that we do not need the other forms of artificial intelligence that have existed for decades. So when we think across this spectrum, I think about starting with the basic forms of AI that are really rules-based. And this would be the opposite of the last clause we talked about before. These are always expert-defined, explicitly coded. So human beings have made decisions about each portion of the rule. And so therefore, the outputs of these models are very targeted, they're deterministic, they're very predictable. If you put A, B, and C in, you're always going to get D out as your answer, for example. In the middle is the predictive or advanced analytics. And so these are much more statistically derived. And they may or may not be augmented by machine learning. So again, thinking back to, I think we talked earlier about those who have taken statistics in the past. Oftentimes these really basically just look like big math equations, right? And they almost always start out where people make decisions about what each factor going into the equation is and how heavily to weight one factor or another. When we start adding machine learning into this, we allow the model itself to learn and grow and to take into account new data as it emerges. So it may switch in and out different variables. It may weight different variables more or less. But generally speaking, with these types of models, we can actually look into them and see how the model has evolved and how it came up with its conclusions. So while it's a little bit more variable in its output and has some machine learning happening, it is not quite so much the black box that we see in more recent generative AI. So that brings us all the way to the far end of the spectrum of generative AI, or AI that's built on these very large language models, and they are generally trained to be able to adapt and grow as data changes. So these have much more generalized and variable output. So as any of you who have used ChatGPT have seen that you could, for example, give the same prompt on a couple of different occasions and receive at least slightly different answers or slightly different outputs depending on when you put it in, because things are changing. It's very similar to if I were to ask two of you the same question. If it was a complex enough question, you may both give me correct answers, but they are not likely to be exactly the same. So in the same way, the outputs of these models can be much more variable. So this slide here is a framework that my team goes back to over and over again whenever we are thinking about using an AI model. And, you know, really, this applies to any computer system in general, but I will obviously think about it more in the context of an AI model. But we look at this importantly because if any one of these components or aspects of the whole system is not working, the whole thing is not going to work. It also, I think, when we're looking at evaluating the use of these systems, these are places where we have an ability to have some oversight of the system and some controls over the system to make sure that they are performing the way we intend them to and that they are safe and responsible. So we often think and worry these days that these new AI models, like I said, are somewhat of a black box, that we don't always know exactly how they're working or how they're reaching their conclusions. But that does not mean that we don't have any control over what they're doing and how they are used within our organizations. So we, first and foremost, the model has to have access to the right data in order for it to do what we want it to do and to avoid some of the errors and problems that it can have. So we have some control over what data the AI model itself sees. Then there's the AI model itself, and we do have some ability, even if we don't always know exactly how it's working, to validate that the outputs that the model is giving are valid and appropriate. And then these last two things I think are particularly important. And sometimes when we look at computer systems, it does look like these last three things are all squished together. You kind of put data in and it does some things and then it spits out an action. But if you really pull it apart, we do have the opportunity along the chain to really, you know, pause and make sure that each step is working and that it's doing what we want it to do. So the AI model is going to come up with an output. And when it puts that output out, the intent of that is to make a decision off of it. And as we, again, previous speakers have already talked about this, that there are really guardrails in healthcare right now that we do not want these AI models doing the medical decision making. So we have to think very carefully about when the model is putting its output out, who is it going to make a decision? Oftentimes it's going to a person like me, a physician who is expected to make a decision or have some oversight of it before we then take action. So there's a lot of room for control there and making sure we are thinking through that part. And then finally, what actions do we intend to take off of that decision? And who's doing that? Are they properly resourced to be able to do that? So this is an area that my team spends a lot of time on, and that is the evaluation of these systems. So there's a lot of stuff coming at us all the time. We have lots of things we want to solve in our healthcare systems with, and there's a lot of promise that AI can help with them, but how do we make sure that they are doing what we want them to do, they're effective, and that they are used responsibly. So this here on this slide is the framework that Alina has come up with at a high level for how we evaluate AI products that we are thinking about using. So you can see we've developed it into a four categories to consider: their clinical utility and safety, bias, equity and fairness, privacy and security, and human considerations. So under each of these categories, we have developed a set of guiding principles. So there's some summary principles here on this slide. And then under that, we have a set of evaluation questions, and we go through that questionnaire with usually the developer or vendor who has the AI product, and we go through all of that, and then that is evaluated by a multidisciplinary group within Alina. So that group contains clinicians like myself. It has IT experts, legal and compliance, and we have medical ethics representation. So it's this diverse group that together looks through the questionnaire and makes a decision about whether this meets our standards to bring into our environment. So where did this come from? I think I'm not going to go into this too much because I think others have touched on it. But in terms of where we are getting our guidance as far as having a framework for how to do this evaluation, we have gotten some guidance from the federal government. I will say that at Alina, we put ours into place before any of these regulatory guidance were starting to come. I think ours came out in early 2023. One organization that we used for initial guidance, and I think is an organization worth kind of keeping an eye on, is known as CHAI, or the Coalition for Health AI. And they have also a very nice framework that is available to align with. But as others have mentioned, under the Biden administration in late 2023, there was an executive order about safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of AI. And from that came what is often called the FAVES model, which stands for fair, appropriate, valid, effective, and safe. So after this came out, we were hearing a lot of this within healthcare organizations and a lot of attempt to align with this. And we at Alina, as many others have, did a crosswalk to make sure that our framework matched this. And as you can see, there's a lot of similarity. But of course, that specific executive order under the new administration is no longer valid. But obviously, we still want to ensure that we have some sort of framework in place to continue to evaluate appropriateness and responsible use. And again, others have mentioned this NIST framework that came out last July. So I think within healthcare organizations, we're seeing a little bit of a shift. So, a year ago, there was a lot more talk about the FAVES framework, and now there's a lot more alignment with the NIST framework. There's a lot of similarities. So there's just a lot of ongoing cross-checking to be sure that any evaluation framework we use within our organization is aligned to these. So what are we using generative AI for in health systems right now? So there's a lot of consensus that these are kind of the categories of things that AI is currently very good at. So things around drafting text, this has been brought up already this morning, gathering and synthesizing information, translating content, and tailoring communication, and automating actions. When we think about a typical clinical encounter, so when I go in to see a patient, or when most clinicians are in with a patient, we follow a pretty standard set of a standard approach of how we do it, things that were drilled into us back in medical school. We have a very common practice that we use to make our medical decisions and then carry them out. So the first step is typically gathering and synthesizing information. And this is a place, again, where AI is very helpful to us because it really helps us to sort through massive amounts of information. So that example Mark gave earlier of the physician who was having a stroke, and the AI system was able to look through thousands of images very quickly and surface the most important things quickly. That is the type of thing where AI can be very helpful to augment our abilities because we can't possibly do it that quickly. And there's just so much data for us to sort through sometimes. And then we take that information, and this is the very crucial part where we are doing our medical decision making and generating an assessment and plan. And I have put this big red circle around there because, in general, not only are our general the regulatory framework is moving us away from doing this, but I think in general, our AI systems are not quite there with this yet. And certainly public acceptance of this is not yet there yet. So we at Alina and elsewhere are putting a very strong line around this, that the medical decision making and oversight still needs to happen by a human being. But then after that, we do things with that medical decision making. We document what we've done, we take actions, and we communicate our assessment and plan. And again, all of these things, AI can really help to augment us, the human capabilities, and offload a lot of our work. To go back to this initial framework that I said I put forth earlier on, this is how our team will go through this every single time, so that when we have an actual AI product in front of us, we'll look at all of these parts. So where's the data coming from? How does the model itself work? Who is the decision maker, and is it the appropriate decision maker at the right time? And then finally, what are the intended actions that are meant to be taken with the output? And so again, I think it's very important for us to make sure that the ears are working well and working responsibly, that we systematically go through each of these steps. And then finally, my final slide here is just kind of unpacking a couple of those concepts from the previous slide that I think are particularly important to note when we are looking at these systems in healthcare. First is just the access that the AI model, the data that the AI model has access to. So this is our classic garbage in, garbage out problem. But when it's with these AI models with large language models that they're trained on, this is kind of like garbage in, garbage out on steroids, because now we're seeing that even small amounts, things that would seem like small cognitive errors or small amounts of bias, can be amplified tremendously if we're not careful for it. So I really appreciate this quote about the fact that our AI models have access to all of this data that reflects the world's beauty, ugliness, and cruelty, but we kind of expect it to only reflect back the beauty. So we have to be very careful that we're mitigating this. A second issue here is what we call the alignment problem, and that is that the AI models are not always solving the exact problem that we're hoping that it will solve. And this, again, is a function of the fact that it has access to data, only has access to the data that it has access to. So if if we can't measure the thing we want it to be solving, it is hard for the AI model to give us the answer we want. So you can see some examples there. But that paper that I have put on the middle of the slide here from the science is a case study that really helps reflect both of these first things. So the impact of bias that exists in the training data, and also the alignment problem. So in this case, this was actually an algorithm used at United Healthcare, and to their credit, they really have made this quite public, and there's been a lot of discussion about this, which I think has really served as a good learning case for us all. But essentially, they were using a large data set to predict future need for healthcare, and it turned out that, a lot of the actions that we as physicians take, even if it's relatively small, there's bias baked into that data. And so that the prediction was not what we had hoped it would be. So racial bias ended up showing up and becoming amplified through this algorithm. So it's a very good case study if you're interested. And then finally, I think it's so important, and I brought this up before, that we really consider where the output of the AI model is going and who the decision maker is, and that we really think about just best practices we've done for years and years, but it still holds true that we want to make sure that we are putting these best practices into place to avoid bias and other cognitive errors in the decision-making process. I think that is the end of my section, and I'll get on to Kelly and
And the lawyers.
the lawyers.
I don't know if you could help take down Britta's slides so I can put mine up. I reordered them a little bit and I can maybe take control then. Thank you. Okay, so I think what's really interesting here is the intersection between the law and AI. And I think what we're seeing is there's sort of a spectrum of lawyer knowledge on this topic. And so I was curious because I wanted to know, what do lawyers know about AI? And so I Googled it, and the AI generated Google statement was while there's a growing awareness of AI among lawyers, a significant portion still lack a deep understanding of the capabilities and limitations, with many only having a basic knowledge of how AI can be used in legal practice, particularly in areas of document review, legal research. However, increasingly savvy lawyers are actively learning about AI to leverage its potential and efficiency gains for better client service. And so I think what that really reflects is that there's a business piece of it that, lawyers can incorporate. And I think that given that AI is such a wide and varied topic, it can also, it's the substance of our practice and how do we manage it. And if any of you remember the cat meme from the early pandemic, where you had the "I am not a cat" technical difficulties, I think it just really illustrated the variety of um, kind of capabilities that lawyers have in the area of technology. And if you haven't seen this meme, do yourself a favor and Google "I am not a cat lawyer," and it should come up for you. But I think, we in this profession have a sort of wide range of technological capabilities, and some of that's generational. Some of that is personal preference for kind of having low tech. And, you then have to build in, educating your lawmakers to make sure your lawmakers who are just, citizens are thinking about these things in a thoughtful and broad-based manner. And then your judges, because, if you have inconsistency among judges and inconsistency among states, it can be really problematic to really know how to have a consistent approach about this. And so my area is medical malpractice primarily. And I thought about, the AI world in the context of how would that manifest in medical malpractice. And I think, as Dr. Hansen pointed out, there's so much great, capability and beauty that we can have from AI. I mean, and even, as we were talking earlier in the FDA space too, the devices that are coming out that will help, catch a stroke at the time it's happening, where that will save someone's ability to walk or talk or interact with others. And we've found that AI can do better in diagnosing and treating decisions, and even be more empathetic than physicians in some instances. I think one of the questions for us is how will AI, the use of it, establish or not establish the standard of care in medicine? So what is going to be adopted sort of writ large? What are we going to expect for our physicians to do? Are we going to expect them to use AI? Are we going to say you have to use it as an augmentative tool, as Dr. Hansen described, or is it going to be expected in the future that no, we really just want the machine who knows everything to do that and not use your independent clinical judgment? I think that there can be, trust issues in, well, how did the algorithm come to what it is? and making sure that there is common acceptance of that too, because it's not just the physicians that have to accept the answers, but the patients, and communicating to the patients how those decisions and how those diagnoses are being made. And then there's always obviously the risk of over reliance on AI. I think there's a lot of folks who maybe rely a lot on ChatGPT to draft an email or to do certain things. And, you don't want to lose the independent, experienced clinical judgment. And then I think in the med-mal space, the questions will be, should you have relied on the AI or should you have overridden the AI? And this may not be right for conversation right today, but that in the future, as we think about how we defend cases or how we bring cases as plaintiffs and lawyers, what will that look like? And, I think kind of one way or another, unfortunately for physicians, someone will be sued. And I think that's part of the question of, what will the landscape be? And again, this brings in all kinds of other dynamics like trust in institutions, trusts in physicians, trust in the healthcare system, and how are we augmenting and fostering greater transparency along those lines. So I just pulled out, from the litigation world, one area of AI and discovery, and I think that this also illustrates the complexity of just one portion of litigation. The Minnesota rules of civil procedure offer broad discovery, and so that will require greater collaboration when requests are made for attorneys to work with their risk management or their health departments, their health records departments, IT and software engineers. And I think what will be difficult in this is that the AI is not going to necessarily be replicable in the sense that there will be, once it's been spit out, you may not have a way to say, well, how did it get to that conclusion? And so that sort of, I don't want to call it mystery, but that lack of charting, as to where that went into each of those steps is going to be a new thing to have attorneys be accustomed to, because it's not going to be a physical, there's no retention of those things, and you're not able to replicate that. And what we're seeing a little bit of that is in the medical record. We have the medical record where we often get requests for live demonstrations of the medical record, and what's hard about that is that with each update of the medical record, it's not being replicated, and each provider's view is customized to their preferences. And so with each upgrade, those views get erased. And so we never really can give you a live view of what it looked like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, or even 6 years ago. I mean, so I think in the AI, as an analogy, we won't be able to replicate what it looked like on March 20th, 2025. I think there's just a lack of legal precedent in this area, and that's going to complicate things in terms of educating your judges, and how do you educate your court on something that, again, you're going to have a wide variety of judges and attorneys who have varying levels of expertise in this area. So really, it will be a challenge, I think, going forward. I know we're at time for questions, but I just wanted to also kind of add in there the complexity of, especially in the discovery period, requests for AI vendors to be part of the lawsuit, and what role will they play, and what will their appetite be for that type of thing. Some of this information they may consider to be proprietary. And again, as we talked about earlier, the garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not using the algorithm in the way that it could be used to its best and highest use, that will give you a suboptimal outcome. And that may be something that a vendor will say, well, that's not on us, that's on the provider who put the wrong information in. We can maybe talk about this in another session, but just to kind of allude to what Paul was talking about in terms of the privacy of medical records, we use AI tools in that space in order to maintain, to facilitate monitoring of our people going into the records appropriately or inappropriately. And so we have an AI system that can flag misuse of the medical record. And we still use human judgment, obviously, to determine whether or not that was in fact a violation. But it also creates risk for the organization, because if you have people who are using the medical record inappropriately, those disclosure that has to be disclosed to the patient, and then they have a private right of action against us. So there is a lot here, and I obviously want to leave time for questions for everyone. So I will conclude my part, because I see that we're over time, but I appreciate your willingness to dive in and explore these very difficult questions.
Great. Thank you both so